good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to a new session of Inspiring Conversations. As always, we will talk about, or I will go through why we are doing, why are we, or why are we. I don't know why I'm talking in plural, but I'm only one, but my guests are also with me, but inspiring conversation is all about creating conversations that really matter. We are diving into ways to connect deeply, break down barriers, and build moments that inspire trust and growth. Whether it is with your team at work or in your everyday chats, will bring more positivity, realness, and impact into every conversation. And just to talk about again, because I am on the beautiful Snæfellsnes Peninsula in Iceland, in the west side of Iceland, and this beauty of a mountain, Kirkjufell, the star of season 5 in Game of Thrones, is just right in front of me. And the big rock in front is artwork by a man called Liston. But my guest today is a lady. Nonetheless, is a lady, and that is Traci Austin. Yay!
Thanks so much
Hello,
for
Traci.
having me.
Well, you're welcome. So, Traci is like you are so much. Have been working as an HR professional and doing that for what 20 years or something. No, not that like it's hard when we are only 29. When we have
True
had so
story.
many when we have so many years on our backs. But like as I say, like you are youngish. So how can it be that you have been doing this for 20 odd years? Tell me a little bit about Traci.
It must have been when I jumped into the Blue Lagoon in Iceland that did it. It was like that magic of it. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. You scrubbed off some years off you. You have been in Iceland. Did you go to the Snæfellsnes Peninsula?
I did, yeah.
So did you see the mountain I just showed?
I went in January, so I believe so.
Yeah. Well, the glacier, which is called Snæfellsnes, that was also a hero, or it was mentioned in Jules Verne's book, The Journey to the Center of the Earth. So that was the entrance to the center of the Earth, according to Jules Verne. So that's fun.
Yes.
But I gather that you liked Iceland because you mentioned when we talked prior that you really want to come back, isn't it?
Yeah, I want to come back in the summer because I was there in January, which was phenomenal. But I believe it will be a completely different experience in the summer than it will be in the winter.
Then we have daylight almost all day round and 24/7, and you will just be, where is the darkness? That is one thing that people complain about when they are here. Like it's either in the middle of winter, it's just like dark, and then in the middle of summer, it's just like light. So people are just like, oh, this is strange, because they can't tell like which time it is, or is it midnight, or is it noon, or well, obviously they can, but it is strange for the brain to go through that experience. But let's start with, besides that you have been to Iceland, who is Traci Austin? And give us a little bit of background before we turn into why Traci Austin has been working so fiercely in the HR community.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so dive in.
Absolutely. So I think, what is your passion? I think that's something that is so important. So, we believe every individual has a right and a choice to be fulfilled in the work that they do. And so thus the human resources, the training and development is so incredibly important within that, because we change cultures through coaching and through training. And so that's one piece, right? We've got the work piece. That home piece is I have 2 kiddos that are now launched. You know how exciting that is when you launch kids and they're out of the house? It's very fun, especially when they're ready for it. But travel's a huge part for me that's so incredibly important, because it's the curiosity around the different experiences and the different cultures and what that looks like. And I think that comes into, that training and coaching and HR is really getting curious around the people that are in front of you and what drives them.
How is it that you came into, like, when you were growing up and stuff, like, what was it that directed you to? Was it just curiosity of how people behave, how people operate, or how, like, the brain works? Like, what is your background for? Why did you choose this path? Because there are so many people who are interested in this field of human resources. So why you?
Sometimes I think things choose you, and sometimes it is, what have you been exposed to, right? Like, we all need that example of what's possible in front of us. So I grew up, my mom was in human resources and my dad was in construction, and ran a general contracting company. So, like, when you think about those 2 things as to where I've landed, running an HR consulting firm, serving blue collar trade organizations, I wonder where those 2 things came from.
But how is it? Because, okay, you have this experience in the HR community, and I have talked to several people, and then, for example, I talked to one he had been in this business for 30, 35 years, and he, like, from when he started to the day I talked to him, he was just like, he felt like, again, like the human resources had somewhat developed maybe in the wrong direction. What is your take on that? Like, has human resources progressed as you would have seen? Like, what is your take on, now you have been in the field and you have watched your mom, who, like, back in the days where it was maybe just head of staff or whatever, but then you call it human resources because there is something in those 2 words that you are brain picking the people because they have something of value for the company. So how do you see it? Has human resources in your mind evolved?
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. So much of HR, like, there's so many facets of HR, right? You have the compliance piece that's incredibly important, but yet with AI, like, can payroll and compliance and some of those things really, be done at a much higher level so that we can focus on the people that are there, for sure. Right. And I mean, one of the key shifts that I really see in HR is that we're much more focused on talent development. We're much more focused on partnering with the employees that are within our organizations versus, like, what, they're lucky to have a job. So, like, there's a huge mindset shift that I believe is happening in HR, especially when we look at the retention piece and the fact that our workforce is growing by 0.4% right now. So it is much harder to hire folks. So that shift into, how do we really retain our key people? How do we ensure that we're paying attention to the levers that bring people and keep them inside of the organization?
Just to let people know that they can comment and be a part of this conversation. So my good friend Rab Bassi, he says, great thoughts, Traci. What was your thought when HR rebranded themselves people teams? Did it change their remit?
Yeah. So here's what I will say is, so often there's words on a wall that mean nothing in the behaviors inside of the organization. So,
Yeah.
it's like when we look at core values, okay, are those words on the wall or are those values lived in the behaviors down the hall? So, with that, I do think that, that shift to like people officers and people teams does have a shift, yet the behavior has to match what the new names describe. And here's how we, typically see that happening is we see that happening with, a strong partnering with leaders. So you look at your managers, your supervisors, but it's also a strong partnering with employees on what is it that they are looking for out of their experience within the organization so that their personal and professional goals are aligned with what the organizational goals are.
But how is it? Because now you mentioned before the words on the wall, and if do the employees take them to heart, or are they just words on the wall? Like how can you get that message through? Because you have some words, and maybe I don't know how you guys do it, but I have been participating in like where we meetings where we were plenty 20, 30 people just diving in and then cooking it down to those three words or whatever. But then, okay, let's revive them in a year, and then what?
Mm-hmm.
So how is it for you guys? Like how is the process? How do you?
Yeah. So, how we do that with our clients is there's a couple of different pieces of it. One is we're coming to a what is that very specific definition of each of those and what are the behaviors of it? So, like we is greater than me. Well, what does that really mean? What does that mean in the behaviors when you're out on a shop floor? What does that mean in the questions that we're asking? And so within that, does it happen at every organization? No, right? And it really is dependent upon, that leadership is how are we aligning those things together? So here's how we do that. One is when we interview, we've got interview guides that include core values as a part of the interview questions. So we're looking right up front, naming here's our core values, here's what the behaviors are, and we build that into the interview questions so we can see if their personal values align to the core values of the organization. So that's number one. Number two is we build that into the one-on-one conversations that happen with employees throughout the year. So we're building it in and we're highlighting a different core value within that. It also becomes a part of the performance management process. So it's not just about, did we hit the numbers and the metrics? Yes, important, but it's also about did we behave in the way that we said that we were going to behave as aligned within those core values? So that's how you start to weave it. And when a behavior doesn't match a core value, we're naming it and we're addressing it because I name culture and we believe culture is the behaviors that you allow or don't allow to happen within the organization.
So because our topic for today is people strategy. I'm starting to hate that word because I can't say it. People Can you say it for me? People.
Yep, the people strategy for the trades.
Yes, a blueprint for high performing teams.
Yeah.
I always have this one word that I just blah 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 blah. But like because I tried to access, as I mentioned I wanted to get the blueprint which you have on your website. But how is it? Because you mentioned the behavior and it, when is it acceptable behavior? Like how do you grasp all of those things into a one? Because in an organization you have 20 people, 50 people, 1,000 people. We all have our backgrounds, and all have our set of values. We have our norms. What is good for me or what I have been taught is not the same as for you. Like how do we put them together so people are like, when you're saying like how do you weave it together, because that must be an enormous task to
Yeah.
get people to
So
understand it.
Yeah. So one of the key things that we do is we're huge on definitions. We're huge
Yeah.
because if I say, ice cream, there's how many different flavors of ice cream out there? And
Yes.
and so we need to define what that is. So ice cream for me might be, bubblegum blue moon, right? And somebody's like, well, bubblegum doesn't go on ice cream, Traci, right? So we have to define it so we're all talking about the same thing. And what ends up happening with those one-on-ones and those team meetings is we are coming with what those definitions are. And so, it's also cascading things through. It's like cascading things through the organization. So, what are the organizational goals? What are the team goals? What are the individual goals? And of course, when I say team, there's going to be several layers of team goals, right? And so we need to ensure that we've got the transparency and that we're all in the same understanding of what the definition is that we're working towards and or what the behaviors are. Because if we're not, then we've got folks that, are not going to be aligned and moving in the same direction. I also want to comment on David said, would you say HR is currently heart and people centered? I think that that's a really hard question to answer because all people are different and all organizations are different. And there's different types of HR organizations that you can have inside of companies, right? And so what is HR's job? Like that definition, I think is really important. They're hired by the organization to serve the organization. That doesn't change. They're also here to serve the people in the organization. So if you think about it, it's kind of like this no-win sandwich, right? The person that's paying you is the organization. And yes, we need to meet those metrics. And are they there to be an advocate for the employee? Sure. So it is that and both. Do I believe that there are tons of really great HR people that are very, very heart and people centered? Absolutely. But if I say that that's everyone, I also don't believe that that's a true story.
But how is it? I just want to give a shout out to Paul Howry because he says like the strategy. I think I will just make another word for strategy. Strategy. This is just unbelievable, and he says it's like kind of saying my name. It's easy. Hedin. Hedin. Come on, Paul. You know it's easy.
That's
But
something
how?
really important. It's easy from where you sit, but it's not
Yes.
easy for someone that doesn't have that experience.
Yes, that's true because like we all have. That's why we all have all something in our baggage. Like we have something in our rucksack, and we are carrying it. And how can we like make sure that we are into like are we allowed to say and express stuff that maybe could offend this one or could like blah blah, like there are all kinds of situations and but because the guys they are really into this conversation and David Pushkin he says he's loving the energy of this conversation, so thank you, thumbs up David. So Rapassi, he wants to know like what two core values that you have now that you wish. Oh, he's asking about two core values that you
Yeah.
have now that you wished you had when you started the journey. So this is the involvement of
Yes,
when
for
you
sure.
started and you had
Yeah.
the flag and was running enthusiastically.
Yeah.
I want to save
So,
the world.
yeah, and what I love about this question is you have organizational core values, then you have individuals' personal values. So for me, two
Yeah.
core values I have now being that, coach consultant is curiosity and transparency. And when I started the journey, I don't know that I was evolved enough to actually have core values or even knew what it was. But what I will say is it was much more about me. It was much more like, oh my gosh, I got this brand new management position. And I have to prove myself and I have to prove myself. And I'm going to check the box and get the task done. Well, that didn't end up very well because I didn't bring people into the conversations as to what I was doing. So I'll give you an example and then I'll go back to those two core values. Um, you know, And yes, I agree with you, Paul. Any more than 4 and they're not core. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because what are those things that align? But like early in my career, my first HR manager role, my leader gave me the task of implementing a drug testing policy inside of our organization. Fine, great, needed, yes. However, I went and rolled it out. We tested everyone and we're doing the whole thing and we're letting people go and whatnot. And I walk into one of these locations, and it was one of those where like offices are all on the side and it's like a bowling alley, like you've got the hallway down the middle. And I walk in and I hear hatchet woman. I'm like, what? And the person at the front desk goes, she kind of gives me that side eye, and I'm like, what? And then I hear it again from the very back of the building, hatchet woman. I'm like, who's hatchet woman? And she looks at me and she goes, you are. I'm like, why am I hatchet woman? And I was so like taken aback. And I'm like, am I offended? Am I upset? Like, what is happening? And so and this was like that moment where it was like the ding, 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 light bulbs went off. And it was, okay. She looks at me and she goes, when was the last time you were here? And I go, last week. And she goes, and what were you doing? And then then she kind of went, and when were you here before that? And what were you doing? And I'm like, okay, I rolled out the drug testing policy. I wrote somebody up. We terminated somebody. And here today, I'm here to write somebody up again. Oh, that's not a good look.
No.
That's not a good look at all. Now, when we look at those things, are those things necessary inside of an organization? Absolutely. However, the way in which we do it and communicate it and bring people into the conversation has such a big impact on what are the outcomes. Because let me tell you, the trust I had both with the staff and that leadership team was like 0. Versus if I would have gone about it differently with curiosity and transparency, it would have led to probably a very different working relationship. Okay, hey, John, director, we're rolling this out. What are your thoughts on it? Mm-hmm. Like rolling it out is not up for discussion. How we roll it out is 100% up for discussion. What are your biggest fears around rolling this out? You notice the curiosity within it? Great. You're afraid of losing your top 3 guys because they smoke a joint every weekend. Fantastic. Okay. So how do we do an and both here? What is the best outcome for you? What he just wanted them to have enough time from the communication that this was rolling out to get what was currently in their system out of their system. Okay. I can probably get behind that, right?
Yeah.
So looking at those conversations, and sometimes you can and sometimes you can't. But anytime you're making a change, what is the reason you're making it? And the curiosity around what are the unintended consequences to it? Oh, I love this, Paul. Rolling out versus steamrolling. Yes. So kind of back to Rab, those core values. I hope that helps explain it a little bit and that journey for me, that personal and professional development journey for me as HR.
But how, because you talk about curiosity and transparency, but in that instant, my mind wandered off to, because I have been I talked previously with Paul on this sessions way back, and we were talking about belonging. So how is it that you, back then, did you feel somewhat of like you had to alienate from, like, or you had to step back and be like, I'm professional, I'm HR, I can't be friends with the staff? Like, how?
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Yeah.
And look at what that does. That separates and creates separateness from the organization anyway. That creates separateness from the leadership team versus being a part of that.
But is that why, like, do you think that is because you didn't belong, that the people said, like, hatchet lady, like, which is like...
No, I don't think so. I think it was more, I was young and I didn't know what I was doing and I was trying to do all the right things, but I didn't really know what right things were. I mean, I think we've all had some of those experiences. And as I'm coaching and working with new leaders on, growing their team, this is a core conversation, which is, where are the multiple competing priorities? What are the organizational needs? What are the needs as you as a leader? What do you think the needs are for the team around you? And then when we start doing cross-functional, hey, what's the impact on accounting? What's the impact on sales? Those things start to have, really important conversations to create the belonging in order to get to the goal.
Yeah. Now, Rap, he wants to get this. He has a question, so he will be sure to understand this talk. Are you coaching the HR people or the organizational leader? Two very different conversations, are they not?
So I coach and work with both. And you named something really, really important. And that is HR leaders and organizational leaders speak two very different languages. One is a language of, people, and one is a language of, those higher level outcomes, the dollars, the impact, those kind of things. And so much of what I'm doing is almost being a translator into, okay, HR, what are you really asking for of your leader? Because here's what they are listening for. And so sometimes it is the same conversation that needs to be couched and said very differently because we're listening for very different things. And let's face it, when we're having conversations with our executive team, we're moving really, really, really fast. I want bullet points. I want to know exactly what's happening. I want to know when, versus a lot of times the HR leaders, in my experience, move at a little bit slower, very methodical pace, following what are those standard operating procedures? What are some of those things? And that creates conflict, right? So as we talked about multiple competing priorities a second ago, it's really important to understand what are those needs of the folks that you're working with, going all the way back to the beginning of our conversation around definition. What is it we're actually working towards?
And how is it when you are, of course you have, as you you have the leaders, you have HR, and then you have the leaders, HR, and then the employees. And how do of course the main goal of having a business must be, I want to get some money. I want to get me something. I will want to have something out of this and make a profit or whatnot. But how can we elevate the employees by saying, okay, you did fantastic. How can we because words like burnout and well-being of the employer, and there are so many things that we are discussing. Why is it that since the technology, the advance in technology and the risk of you have AI, and AI is maybe taking people's jobs, and all of these concerns, how can we, because you want to lift the employer, and the employer has to have a sense of belonging, or this is what I do. I want to do this. I want to get paid, and you get my drift. I have studied this, or I have done this, and I'm here, and I want to show my expertise. But then, so do you know what I mean? If you have a project, you have a project, and then it's just well done. Okay, tomorrow we will do. Instead of saying, okay, let's celebrate.
Yeah.
Is there a time? Yeah.
So I think that there's a couple of things here, and I want, kind of to Rab's point, is who are we talking about here when we're having this conversation? Yeah. And typically this is mid-level leaders, right? That are, having these conversations and those direct relationships with line level employees. Of course, each person has their direct reports that they're working with. And I do believe that this has changed in HR, and that is, it's what we're seeing to be really successful is leading people the way they need to be led. And, we use predictive index in our organization and, the 5 languages of appreciation. And there's a couple other, assessment tools that we use because we are not all created the same. We do not all have the same behavioral drives. And when we look at that and say, what does each person need? It starts to become this conversation that is truly that, a conversation, which is why the one-on-ones become so important. And I think before I go further, I want to just name, there's 5 levers of engagement that we really see an impact, employee satisfaction and fulfillment at work. The first one is fit to role, meaning, is the person in the right role based on their natural behavioral style, based on education, experience, all of those things, right? And so often what we find is folks are not in the right role. Let me give an example. My first 7 years, I was doing, payroll, I was doing benefits, I was doing all the very, very detailed work of HR. Let me poke my eyes out with needles. I'm not that detail oriented. I don't catch all the details to be, chained to a desk all day long, and maybe a little bit here and there talking to employees, awful for me and my behavioral style, right? And so, that's number 1 is figuring out, here's what the job needs. Here's what the person needs. Are those things a match? If not, we're probably going to have an issue. So that's number 1. Number 2 is looking at, is the leader leading me the way I need to be led, right? So I'm somebody that is very, independently driven. I like to talk, clearly. I move really fast. I'm a change agent. I see something that needs to be changed. I'm going to kind of say, okay, let's go do the thing. Then I want to hand it off to somebody that has the detail orientation, that process piece. And for me, deadlines, they're kind of negotiable, right? It depends upon a lot of factors. So I need to be led in a way that works for me, that I can grasp onto that and have clear definition over what's needed, what are the deadlines. If you don't tell me why a deadline is, I'm probably not going to hit it. Right. So now there's, an individual on my team who's phenomenal. Her behavioral style is the exact opposite. A deadline to her is in stone. So if I keep switching deadlines on her, she gets really, really frustrated and becomes disengaged. So yet do I need her to ensure we get our stuff done and meet our client needs? Absolutely. And so it's really kind of looking at those key things. What does the job need? What does the individual need in order to be led? The third is, what does the team need? So what is the strategy that this team is executing on? And do we have the right players? So we're turning up the strengths of each person versus playing whack-a-mole on the weaknesses. So often it's you did that wrong and you did that wrong and you did that wrong. It's well, I don't feel like I can win here. And what happens is we start to disengage. So that team piece becomes really important. Culture, we've talked a lot about already. And then the 5th that I would name is seasons of life. And here's what I mean by that is there's certain seasons where you're climbing that career ladder and you want to get to that next thing. How did I make it doing payroll and those kind of things for 7 years? Because I was in a season of life that I knew I needed that experience to get to the position that I wanted.
But how is it? Because when you're saying this is the core, this is just how do you spot them, these individuals, and how do you see them? How do you elevate them? And because being a leader, it's always somebody, oh, you have a potential, you can be a leader. And then there is always for one leader, then there is somebody who is why did they choose him? Why? And then they start bitching about the person and whatnot. But because there are no leaders, you don't go to university to say, yes, where is the leader school? Or you have, either you have it or you don't. How do you work on this together?
Yeah. I think that there's 2 things. I think one is the distinction between can a person do something and do they want to do something. Want
Oh,
is
yeah.
really, really important. And if they don't want to do it, they're not going to do it. Right.
Yeah.
But, data is really important. Like I said, we use validated assessments for that, which becomes really important. So I think that's probably number one. And then that number two thing that I would say is incredibly important is ask them, are you having those conversations? If you're not having the conversations, again, curiosity and transparency. We're not having conversations. We're not bringing into transparency into what's needed, the definition, and we're not curious about what they want. Because guess what? The person that is going to be the expert on what they want is themselves, not someone else.
So now we have to go. It sounds like you're touching on either. I love it how you Americans always talk in like abbreviations. EOS, I only know that from a Canon camera, or for 4DX. Do you have a recommended or preferred OOS for HR to understand? Why don't you just write this in Chinese, Paul? This is
All right,
like,
Paul,
okay,
I understand some of this. I don't,
yeah,
4DX, I'm not pulling. I think you're talking about an operating system for HR, but I'm not sure. But EOS is entrepreneurial operating system, so it's the
thank
book
you.
Traction. Yeah, there's definitely, a lot that we focus on that, almost all of our clients are on some form of EOS. Like I said, we use predictive index. So there's a PI perform that really allows us to have goals that align to it for sure. That's really successful. There's tons of those out there with that. So I'm not sure if I'm really answering your question. Organizational operating systems. Yeah. So, for those organizational operating systems, that entrepreneurial operating system is a good one. Sometimes it doesn't work for the larger organizations, but like I said, almost all of our clients are on some form of that. So like 90.io is a really good one. PI Perform is a good one to track all those things and ensure that you have clarity in the definition. One of the things that we find so often, I'll go on site with a client and I hear an employee say, well, I didn't get my bonus. I go, okay, well, why didn't you get your bonus? Well, I don't know. Well, did you hit your goals? Well, I don't know what my goals are. Like, well, I think we've got a problem. I think we've got a big problem. So, and this happens all of the time. And so, I love your question, Paul, because you're essentially saying, where is this stuff tracked? Where's the transparency to know what our goals are and what that specifically looks like? And, guys, let's get this out of Excel documents and emails, like so confusing, right? But to really get into a very transparent 90.io is what I absolutely love, because you can set up, your annual goals, your 3-year goals, your 5-year goals, then you can roll it down into quarterly goals. It's transparent to everyone in the organization. So those are just the ones that I'm most familiar with. There's lots of others out there.
But now, because time flies when you're having fun, and we are definitely having fun. The topic of our conversation was like people, my name for the trades. A blueprint for high-performing teams. So when did you, like I gather that you must have been in your thousands of hours working in HR and all of those years and yada, yada, yada. When did you come up with the blueprint? Like, what is the main thing with the blueprint? And
okay, I'm going to tell
did you run a marathon and then all of a sudden, oh, yes, the blueprint?
So the blueprint came out of, I felt like I was continuously teaching the same thing. And it was like, okay, we just need to operationalize this. And you can get that through the download. But with that, I got tired of people bitching, to be perfectly honest, right? And so, here's what happens in HR. Walk in the office, hey, Tracy, blah, 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 blah is happening. So-and-so didn't show up on time. So-and-so did this. Drop it on their desk and they leave. And then 3 weeks later, well, I told Traci in HR and she didn't do anything about it, so it's her fault. I'm like,
Yeah.
nope, we're not playing that game. So then I came into, okay, what is it that employees really need? Do they need venting sessions? Do they need solutions? What is it that is needed? And guess what? This goes all up and down the organization, right? I hear from, owners, nobody wants to work anymore. Okay, well, what does that really mean, right? And so, like, these complaints, what are they really? And so, it's really, here's what we believe is every complaint is just a poorly worded request. So, or to say it more fun, stop bitching and start pitching. Like every time you're bitching about something, make a request instead. So if every complaint is a poorly worded request, that blueprint for high performing teams is to start to address the concerns and figure out what's underneath them. And so what that looks like, and I'll just use the example of no one wants to work anymore. So if, I'm talking with you or I'm talking with Paul and saying, okay, Paul, I just heard you say nobody wants to work anymore. What do you mean? Well, we've turned over 30 people in XYZ location in the first 90 days of them being employed. So nobody wants to work anymore. Okay. So we have either a hiring problem or a retention problem during onboarding. So we're digging down into what is the actual problem. Because typically a complaint is a frustration, right? The complaint is a frustration, but we need to figure out what they're actually complaining about. Like, what is the real problem? And this is where data becomes so important. All right, so no one wants to work anymore leads to turned over 30 employees in the last 30 days. Okay, so 30 employees out of how many? All right, so let's just say I'm making up numbers, but we've got 80% turnover in the first 90 days. Cool. How much turnover did we have in the first 30 days? 60%. Okay, so it's not a 30 to 90 day problem necessarily, but the bigger problem is the 0 to 30 day. How many turned over in the first week? Right? So these curious questions really get us down to, are we hiring warm bodies because they have a pulse? Or are we, come on now. Are we hiring warm bodies because they have a pulse? Or
sorry.
Or
are you alive?
I know, right? Or is it that it's not a fit to role problem? Remember my 5 levers of engagement from earlier? Is it the problem we're hiring the wrong people? Is the problem that, we bring them in and we're hazing them? Is the problem that we're saying, hey, we expect you to know exactly what to do. Here's your work. And, oh, well, you did this wrong and you did that wrong and you did this wrong and you did that wrong on day one. Like, what is the problem? So we can take the complaint and figure out what the request is. Okay, the request is we need to do a better job of bringing in the right quality people. And Rabbi, I like what you're saying. AI is a great reader, researcher, and responder. What impact will AI make on the delivery of coaching? So I'm going to talk about that within this very specific example. Then I'll talk about it in coaching in a minute. But, you can put job descriptions into AI along with core values. Remember those behaviors we talked about earlier? And say, hey, which ones are the best here? Now, remember, AI is taught by us what to look for. So do we potentially have discrimination in there and all the other things? Yeah. Guess what? We need to really ensure that the AI tools we are using are based on the models that we want it to use. I think that's really important, and that we're using it as a tool, not as an end all be all. But kind of going back to, that blueprint for high performing teams is 1, we need to understand what the true complaint is. 2, we need to figure out based on that, what problem are we actually solving? Once we know what we're solving, what is the request and who is the request to? This doesn't mean that it always falls on the leader, and I think that this is something that's really important. We put a lot of pressure on leaders, and it's their fault and it's the company's fault. Guess what? Every employee has an obligation within this and something that they're bringing to it. You got to tell us what you want. You got to tell us what you're committed to. You need to follow through on what you say you're going to do too, because it is a partnership versus like a parent-child relationship. And I do believe that that has changed over time within HR.
Yeah. But how is it? Because now you have mentioned we have mentioned the blueprint, and underneath, like now I'm showing your company's website and elevatedtalentconsulting.com, where you can sign up for the blueprint. Talk to me about, because I find it interesting. You say, like, when did you start Elevated Talent Consulting? And because I read about you that the company is like a certified woman-owned business, and you focus on small businesses, and you have HR professionals that you work with and stuff. How is it? Is the need for a woman-driven company more in this field, or because, correct me if I'm wrong, the most people in HR or leading HR, they are women, aren't they?
Yeah, for sure. So,
I'm not trying to be sexist or something. Like it's just like because
no, you're good. Certified women owned is really about certain government contracts that were available within that. There's a lot of organizations that like to hire based on that and have some numbers. So that's really what that's about. So is that aligned within this? Maybe, maybe not. Right. So we're 7.5 years old, is where we're at. But one thing, and I'm not saying men don't have this, but I think one thing with women that I found is that there is an intuition piece. And I want to go back to Rab's question really quickly, because I do think it's important. And, his question had to do, what impact will AI make to your delivery of coaching? AI is not intuitive. And so often in our coaching conversations, the questions that I'm coming up with for a client are very intuitive, based on the facial expressions, based on the body language that I'm seeing, based on, what I know about them from our previous coaching conversations. And there's a huge piece of intuition that AI is not going to be able to replace, right? AI sorts through what we've put out there, but it doesn't have that intuitive piece to it. And I do think that that is something that's incredibly important. AI brings a plethora of information that brings forward some really great questions. But yet in that coaching, sometimes it's that thought partner that you need in front of you to have that conversation that has the intuitive piece to it.
But how is it? Because you say that Elevated Talent Consulting, it's 7 years old. So what compelled you to? Did you prior that? Were you a HR professional in a companies or in organizations, and then you just felt the need? Was it a log? And the word number two.
So
My name number two. Was it a logistical step for you to go and build your business?
Yeah. So I was in nonprofit organizations for 10 years, building HR departments from the ground up, meaning you're doing all of the HR tasks versus pieces of it. From there, I went into consulting. So I was consulting for nursing homes, building talent development pieces. And that's really where it's like that talent development piece and that partnership really kicked in. It's like, what is the partnership that we're looking to create, with all of the folks that we're working with to get the results? So from there, I was consulting. And then when I started this, it was really about that intuitive piece, but that coaching piece and that training piece versus the compliance piece, because you do have that dichotomy in HR of like, and I would say that that's the old school HR is, it's all compliance. We're doing it because we have to, versus how do we truly get our folks to want to be at work, to want to be engaged, to want to, do the work because they're so aligned with what the vision and mission of the organization is. That's a completely different work experience than, one where you're there for a paycheck.
How is it when you say this, because you have your experience and stuff? HR is like a department that you want to be close to the leader, and you want to be in the top hierarchy, like you want to be as one of the department heads and whatnot. But it's very easy to just, well, now HR is under the finance. Well, now the HR is on, like, where do you see, it must be easy to just move HR around, and HR is always in this uncertainty, whom do I belong? Is that the case in the US, or because I know here in Iceland there are these things that sometimes it depends on the leader, it depends on the manager, it depends on or like who is at the top of the level. Yeah, HR, we have to really think and focus upon our employees, and then comes the next leader and manager, and just like, no, this should be.
Yeah, so, there's lots of different cultures and there's lots of different organizational structures. And I'm not here to tell you which one's good or bad. It depends upon what it is for the organization. And guess what? There's definitely cultures I just won't work in and I don't want to work in because I don't feel that people are valued. So, that is a leadership decision as to where HR sits and what value they will put on it. I can give you, the stats around impact on profitability based on, people first and all that stuff. But, each organization has their decision making that they're making around that. Are we seeing much more shift? Yeah, absolutely. But with that, as HR shifts with AI coming in, where AI can do a lot of the payroll and it can do a lot of the compliance pieces and it can do a lot of those tracking, much better sometimes than people can, because it's pulling data. And then you need people to make those intuitive decisions and questions and whatnot around it, for sure. So, my belief is that HR does need to 100% be integrated into the fabric of leadership because it's pulling in all of those key pieces. One trend that we're seeing very significantly in organizations is that they're starting to hire internal coaches, whereas, leadership or talent development and learning and development, can be a part of HR, but, that coaching piece is really, really important. And we're seeing a significant impact in organizations that have coaches. So whether that's hiring somebody in from the outside to coach your key leaders, somebody like myself, or you're hiring an internal coach that's coaching your leadership team, we are seeing that shift because it is the mindset that folks have. Even if they have all of the intellectual piece, if they don't have that, emotional intelligence within that and the ability to critical think and look at the multiple competing priorities, they're definitely going to be missing things.
Yeah, brilliant. What does the future hold for Traci Austin and elevated talent consulting and HR, and like what is in your future, Traci? How do you see things evolve? How do you, like, because AI, we don't know, we are taking our baby steps, aren't we? Even though AI is taking
Yeah,
7 mile steps.
I think that there's two things here. I think that partnership and the connectivity with people becomes really, really important and will continue to be important. The value that we place on those relationships, and, because I don't know about you, but for me, the greater trust I have with someone, the more likely I am to do business with them, to share with them, to trust what's there. And that synergy is incredibly important. And So I do see HR continuing down some like that talent development, the coaching, those kind of items. Again, you have to have really clear outcomes and expectations around what is the outcome we're looking for? What is the behaviors that we're going to allow inside of our organization? Rob, I love your question. He wants to know what is
Oh,
the
yes.
what is Icelandic for strategy?
But he says also strategy. Like I'm no comment. he, he's the one who he pokes. He's a poker. He's always teasing me because this is just the funniest. I don't know why oops, there she went.
Oh, there we
Oh,
go.
there we are. Yeah. I don't know why I can't say this word. It's just like brain freeze. I'm not answering you, Rap. But what is you didn't I think you didn't answer the question about what is next for Traci Austin. How do you see yourself in 20 years?
Yeah,
Then
you
you're
know,
then
I
you're
see.
maybe then you're maybe 49 or 29.
Yes, yeah. So where do I see myself? I think personal and professional dance together. Like I will tell you in the next year, I definitely see myself actually moving to Europe for 4 months and working remotely doing our training programs. So
Of
we have a
course.
program called our leadership development program that combines leadership training with coaching. And we'll be running several cohorts of that. And I do believe we will be doing much more of that and much more of the integrated training and coaching together of creating people strategies. I see coaching becoming a much, much larger part of our organization. We've actually shifted completely away from doing HR consulting. We're doing training and we're doing coaching. And that is, where I see a huge future in this, and utilizing some of those AI tools along with the data tools like predictive index within it.
Well, you know what country you can stay for 4 months, where there's brightness for 4 months. You don't have to sleep; you just work. But Rap, he says that AI is still an 8-year-old child, which believes everything it reads is the truth. Well, oh,
Intuition, like that
yeah,
intuition and the critical thinking, right, Reb?
yes.
Yes, Reb, and I am looking for resources in Europe. I'm trying to figure out this thing. So
Yes, but how is I forgot to talk to you about when you talk to other professionals, HR professionals. Do you sense like are there a great difference in like the different countries?
Um, cultures definitely in countries and organizations, yeah, for sure. There definitely are significant differences based on the culture of the organization, and like, when we're working in global organizations as well, it's paying close attention to what the local cultural values are as well. And sometimes things don't translate well, and understanding what's there, again, going back to curiosity.
Yeah. Well, this has been an awesome chat or awesome session because I think that you were probably Icelandic. You were not aware of it, but because I think we met like when we talked for the first time, I was just like, oh, we will definitely talk for an hour.
Are we
And the
over our hour?
humor.
I typically blow past the end of
No,
the.
we are like we have maybe a minute left, but I just want to because I have to close down. But next in inspiring conversation is in a week where I will talk to Thomas Wilson, and the topic is that this will be a great session because from monster to mentor, the healing power of storytelling and the fight for inclusion, which is like there are lots of things happening in the world and people who are not like if you're not as the majority of people, what do you do then? So that will be awesome talk, I think. And I just Traci, you're the best. This has been so much fun and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that like as you say you have a podcast, you have like you are I think you're 24 hours in the 24/7, they are probably 28 or something. You do so much. I am just like, and it's unbelievable that we are the same age.
29, right?
29, yes. So, but like, and it's funny because I came up with this: be curious, be interested, be inspired, and just go for it and ask questions and be interested in each other, because we have to belong. There is so much like inactivity in connections. We have to belong. That is what we are all about. We need. Remember in COVID, it was like I was amputated because I couldn't hug people. I was just like, it's just the worst thing ever. So you are just brilliant, and I urge people. I don't know even if you're on Facebook, but you definitely are on LinkedIn. So if people could contact you
Yes.
and stuff,
Yep.
and just remind them, I will remind them again of elevatedtalentconsulting.com. There are loads of stuff there. Get the blueprint, like, just, and ask questions, and just follow everything. Or you can comment. Yeah, well, that is too late now because we're finished. You can follow Hands-On Coaching on social media, and you can follow Traci, and you can follow her company. So, but Traci, brilliant conversation, and I hope that you are happy too. And
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today.